Alex Berenson back in the mix, the man who stood athwart the madness on COVID and got a whole lot of it right when it was really hard to do so. He is the author of a Substack, Unreported Truths, and also the book Pandemia. Alex, so Fauci, he testified. He just came clean on everything, said he was sorry, and admitted that he got everything wrong, right?
Oh, yeah. That's exactly what happened. It's actually very disappointing because Republicans had a chance. They got him in front of Congress.
I think he's breaking up. Let's call him back and make sure we get a better signal. We're going to be talking to Alex Berenson. And, Buck, your opening question is about the testimony we got from Fauci this week. And I think what Alex is going to say is that he wanted there to be a greater takedown of Fauci than there was. And this is just advice that I would give. I know every politician wants their 5 minutes in the sun when they're questioning here. I wish they would deputize the smartest person who is on this committee and knows the facts front and back and sideways and let them ask every question. And I know that's counter to everybody gets their 5 minutes to say whatever they want. They could meet and suggest questions, but I feel like you would get a far better reflection of questioning if you got the single most informed person to ask.
I think that's true. And team, let us know if we get them back on the air. I would just say the problem with that is for so many of these congressional hearings, the point is not actually transparency or truth. It is for members of Congress to grandstand in both parties, get a viral moment, and get on their respective cable news source of choice. Alex, you are back.
Yes,
we are hoping the phones keep you going here. So you were saying Fauci, total mea culpa. Wow, he has so much integrity.
Yes, no, that's exactly what happened. No, I mean, look, here's the thing. What you said about the grandstanding and members of Congress looking for their moment in the sun, that's true, right? And against a university president who's not used to testifying, you may be able to do that. But against Tony Fauci, it's not going to work, okay? Because Fauci has been at this game for 40 years. He knows when to say, I don't recall. He knows when to throw somebody under the bus. He knows, who's going to protect him on the Democratic side.
I'd argue he knows that better than anything else, including anything having to do with medicine, by the way.
That's probably true. So the 5-minute disjointed, and I get, you're a member of Congress, you want to get to ask your questions, you've been elected to do that. But if the Republicans don't have a strategy of we're going to build up our questions this way, we're going to handle it this way, Fauci's just going to, you're not going to be able to get to him. So you have one good question and he parries it, and then you have something completely random from another member. So that's sort of what happened. And I think, I think it was disappointing because in some ways it's sort of like, I don't know that they're going to get another chance. I don't know. Look, Rand Paul is obviously going to keep pushing on Fauci, and Rand Paul is very smart and very diligent and very determined and has staff that's going to push on this. But for those of us who thought, okay, you know what, they are getting Fauci to testify, and they're doing it in the wake of these hearings in the last couple of weeks where, especially David Morin's, this guy who worked for Fauci, there was damning testimony about how he had hidden information from Freedom of Information Act requests, and how essentially he even said in some emails that Fauci seemed to be encouraging him to do that. They were not able to present a coherent narrative or get Fauci off his game.
We're talking to Alex Berenson. Alex, what did you? We're going to get into to other issues with you as well. But what did you make of the New York Times suddenly coming out? It almost felt like in conjunction with the Fauci speech and saying, "Oh yeah, by the way, the evidence all overwhelmingly suggests that COVID did come from a Chinese lab in Wuhan." After years of telling anyone they were a conspiracy theorist for even mentioning that idea, for saying that it was racist to be able or willing to share that idea. Where are we headed? This is a question we've asked you now for a while, but now that I think it's fair to say COVID is over in terms of it being a political related issue, how long do you think it will take for the truth from a historical perspective to start to set? And what is that going to look like in your mind over the next 10 or 15 years?
So that's a great point you made, and a great question, because it was the same day. It clearly was tied to his testimony at the hearing. Very interesting that the New York Times, the voice of the liberal establishment, published a piece, and I wish they would take it out from the paywall. But I don't know how anyone could look at that piece and not say the evidence for a lab leak is overwhelming. It was very graphically well done. It just takes a couple minutes to read, and at the end of it, you say, "Wow! Like, how could anyone disagree that this almost certainly came from that lab based on this overwhelming evidence?" Meanwhile, Fauci will not admit that, right? So but again, because he's too smart now to, insist on something that, is not true. Instead, he'll say, "Well, my mind is open. It was always open. I always just wanted the truth." And, that's not true, right? In 2020, he and the virology community clearly steered, the rest of the world, the governments, the media, independent investigators away from any lab leak evidence, right? Or any investigation of a lab leak. So now it's 4 years later. Whatever evidence the Chinese had, it's gone. Okay, we will never get to it. Is there evidence somewhere in some NSA database of, for example, sequences of coronaviruses that were held at that lab that are very, very close to SARS-CoV-2? That would be something close to a smoking gun. Okay, and we know that the Chinese had 19,000 sequences posted. Genetic sequences from coronaviruses that they took down and have never again allowed the world to see. And it is possible that one of those 19,000 is the genetic precursor to SARS-CoV-2. So the Chinese we're never going to see that. But I have to believe that somewhere in the U.S. intelligence community, that database was saved. Maybe not. That would be a smoking gun. If we can't get that, and if we can't get somebody who was at inside that lab to defect and tell us the truth, there will that seems incredibly unlikely, given that China has become sort of more and more totalitarian in the last few years, and I'm sure the penalties that person's family would face, would be enormous, and the Chinese would just deny it anyway. So if we can't get there, we're going to be in a place where I think most people will reasonably assume this came from a lab, but there will be deniers, and unfortunately, those deniers will be actually people in positions of power. Fauci and his acolytes
at the CDC and the NIH, not like deniers in some dark corner of the internet. We're speaking to Alex Berenson. Alex, wait, before I wanted to switch gears with you because we don't have much time, and initially I wanted to. We brought you on, and Clay's like, we got to talk Fauci. I'm like, I know, let's talk Fauci first, but we also wanted to ask you. The Trump show trial has taken the United States to the edge of disaster. You're not a catastrophist guy, and you're not a Trump partisan guy, but this is on your Substack, Unreported Truths, which I recommend people subscribe to. You're seeing this is a big, big problem. I want to hear it from you because you're not the usual I just, love MAGA and America first and all that stuff. You see this as somebody who just says this is horrible for the country.
Yes. So yes, it's horrible for the country. And I wrote this thing, by the way, and, my supporters tend to be more conservative than I am. And actually, a lot of them didn't like what I wrote, because here's what I wrote. The trial was terrible. Okay. Anybody who paid close attention to this trial and to the civil fraud trial, which was even worse, knows that Donald Trump has been fined $500 million now, close to $500 million, for loans that he took out and repaid in full. And now he's facing 4 years in prison for what? For misclassifying a payment to a lawyer made in 2017 after an election that supposedly influenced that election? Does Donald Trump have a time machine? Because I don't understand how that worked. Okay, so the cases were a joke, a dangerous joke, brought in a very, very deep blue jurisdiction. Okay, and I'm not saying, by the way, that all four of the cases are equally bad. This case was definitely the worst, and it is unfortunate that is the one that went forward first. Okay, But Republicans now, they're furious, right? And they are saying, we are going, you know what? If you're going to weaponize the law against Donald Trump, who is the leading candidate for president, who is the leader of the Republican Party, if Democratic prosecutors are going to do that, guess what? We're going to find ways to do that too. We are going to escalate, and if Trump wins, he is more or less, I promise it's too strong a word, but he's strongly suggested he's going to escalate, and that is really dangerous, okay? And I don't know how we get out of it, because if the Democrats win, they're going to say, hey, this went great for us. We called him a convicted felon, and we convinced just enough people to get the walking corpse known as Joe Biden reelected. So if the Democrats win, they're going to view what they did as a victory. If the Republicans win, they are going to want payback in the most vicious way. And what happens then? I don't know. But if we're in a country where people who are, politicians from Alabama are afraid to come to New York, or politicians from New York are afraid to have fundraisers in Florida, I mean, that is a recipe for, ultimate dissolution of the country. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but, I never thought that was even a remote possibility. And now you would have to say we're going in a direction that it is at least a remote possibility. And that's, as somebody who loves America and loves all 50 states, that's terrifying to me.
Okay, so I actually think this is an interesting question for you then. Let's pretend you could wave a magic wand and avoid this, conflict continuing. Is the way to do that by making Democrats have the same fear that Republicans have to have now? Or is there some other way? Because the analogy I made on the show was, détente works because you're afraid that if you fire a nuclear weapon, you will get blown up too.
Right.
Right now, by and large, Republicans have not tried to put Democrats in prison, certainly not the same level that Democrats have. How do you fix it?
So I agree with that. And there is this argument. You need deterrence and the threat of retribution. I mean, I guess, and it's funny because I suppose that's one possibility. The other possibility would be that Trump, and I said this in the Substack, if Trump wins, 35 states, if he actually wins in a major way, perhaps, I don't think of him generally as a guy who's sort of a forgiving. You don't think of Donald Trump as being the most forgiving guy. Maybe he says, look, the voters have seen this for what it was. They've punished the Democratic Party. I don't need to do this. And so that would end the cycle, one would hope. Now, it's also possible if he won like that, he would say, I have a mandate to do whatever I want. I'm going to prosecute all these people. But I would hope that wouldn't happen. So I do understand this idea of you need to deter, but I just don't see how that works. Because there will be Democratic prosecutors who have the power to do this in Democratic states too. So there is sort of there's no logical end to the cycle if Republicans escalate. And I understand their desire to escalate, knowing how terrible these cases are. But this is why I'm frightened by it, because I don't see a good way out.
No doubt. Alex Berenson, encourage you guys to go check out the Substack. I'm sure we'll talk to you again soon. Alex, we appreciate the time. Have a good weekend.
Thanks, guys. And I'm sorry about my phone.
No worries. You're good. Once you got back on. Happens every time. You would think it's one of the bane of the existences of radio people. This was an issue 25 years ago when cell phones first started getting popular. We still have not managed to have cell phones that consistently can keep signals, and every one of you out there knows somewhere in your neighborhood where it's not going to work very well. It's just the reality.